DND number 7, Warriors in Jesus' Name, Chapter 6. Mark stood just outside the courtroom doors. Try that again. Mark stood just outside the courtroom doors speaking to Justin Lee, the head of the law firm for which he worked. Justin was much more than his boss, though. He'd begun the relationship as Uncle Justin, even though they were not blood related, when Mark was only 8 years old. Justin being the best friend of Eric Keno, Mark's stepfather, he'd been a regular in the household for the past 22 years. Mark had immense respect for him as an attorney, as his mentor, as a martial artist, and as a friend. They discussed the cases Mark would be handling before the judge in this morning's court session. Justin was making sure that Mark had all his ducks in a row, which didn't insult Mark at all. Mark looked down, his black shoe kicking softly at a scuff on the shiny tile floor of the courthouse as he listened to Justin's advice. And if you let Judge Mayfield know today that both the mother and sister of the girl will testify against her, it's possible the case could be thrown out, Justin said. Mark nodded. Well, that's what I'm reaching for. Good. Now, did the reports come in on the Bailey case? Mark shook his head and sighed heavily. No. I'm going to have to ask for a continuance. Justin frowned. Judge Mayfield won't like it. Well, it can't be helped. I'm waiting on the medical report from Dr. Kadowski. He's world-renowned in his field, and his report will go a long way to exonerate Miss Bailey. She did not abuse that child. Justin nodded. A little emotionally involved in this one? Mark shrugged. How can I not be? She's so young and scared. The state feels bad for the little boy and wants someone to blame. I feel bad for him too, but not at the expense of a 20-year-old girl's entire life. Stand back a little, Mark. Get too involved and you don't think as clearly. I like your passion, but I want you to be at your best. It's the only way you can really be of service to Miss Bailey and everyone else you represent. Mark nodded. Yes, sir. I'll work on that. He said, just as he heard a loud burst of laughter. He looked up to see Gordon Landau making his way down the corridor, a group of his cronies hanging on his every word. Gordon Landau was a prominent defense attorney. He regularly broke bread with several judges and with a few in the DA's office. Not that that was any big deal. Justin did the same. However, Gordon's cockiness annoyed Mark. Add in the fact that every time Mark looked at the man, he wanted to put a fist in his fat mouth, and one might say that dealing with Gordon was not a favorite part of Mark's day. Usually, Mark hardly ever ran into the man, since Gordon was a big wheeler-dealer who usually worked the state court, and Mark was a lowly grunt who thus far had worked only county court. This morning, however, it looked like Gordon would be working the same court, and Mark had to admit he was curious to see just how good the guy was. Today would only be preliminary hearings. Still, Mark would have a chance to see Gordon in action. Know your enemy, his stepfather always said. He intended to do just that. Justin Lee, Gordon said loudly as they approached the courtroom double doors. He extended his hand. Justin shook his hand and nodded politely. Gordon. Nice to see the competition, Gordon joked. The several attorneys who accompanied him chuckled politely. Nonsense, Justin said, his voice friendly. There's no competition at all. Mark smiled as he watched Gordon's eyes flicker with controlled anger. Gordon looked at Mark then, as if he hadn't noticed him standing there. He nodded. Mark? Gordon, Mark answered. Justin gonna let you teeth on a few cases today? Only a few, Mark answered. Well, you got to get in there sometime and start earning your keep, right? Oh, absolutely, Mark said again, doing his best to not let the little jibes get to him. Court's about to start, Justin said as he opened the door for all to precede him. Mark and the other attorneys filed in. Gordon motioned for Justin to go ahead. I'll be right there, he said. I got to take a leak. He hurried away. New scene. Joey wandered up the large staircase, since Breeze insisted on doing the breakfast dishes. He couldn't help it. He was curious about the amazing woman who seemed to occupy his mind. Wandering into what he thought must be her bedroom, he examined his surroundings. The bed linens were white, the bed was white, the dresser was white, the curtains were white, and the walls were white. Well, maybe the walls were off-white, but essentially white. It would have seemed quite sterile, except that there were bold splashes of color everywhere. The throw pillows on the bed were a vibrant red and yellow. The small chair on the other side of the bed was a brilliant blue with huge red polka dots. Along the top of the white dresser were 8 bright blue bottles. But the most astounding splash of color was the painting above the bed. A brown earth path meandered along a thicket of trees and underbrush on one side. Along the other edge of the path was a steep drop-off, and farther down, a rushing creek, bubbling over rocks and dropping down into a deeper pool. Wildflowers in brilliant yellows, blues, and pinks popped up here and there among all the briars and undergrowth, which was done in great detail. A bee floated in the air. A bird sang from a branch of one of the trees. The painting was remarkable, and Joey felt as if he were in this place, walking along the very path. He moved closer, examining the strokes of the paintbrush, feeling the movement of the painter. He knew before he made out the signature who had painted it. "What are you doing?" Breeze asked, hands on hips. Joey looked back at her. "Wow, Breeze, this is magnificent." She blinked a few times, but couldn't stop her eyes from filling with tears. "Thank you, Joey." He sat down on the edge of the bed. "When you spoke of painting, it sounded like it was just a hobby, and I made light of it, and I'm sorry. I had no idea you were this good. I mean, good grief, Breeze. This is incredible. You should be showing your work at a gallery. You should be selling paintings for thousands." "Hardly. I don't know that much about art, but I know I haven't seen a piece that moves me as much as this one right here." She giggled. "Oh, that's probably because you want to get in good with the artist." He frowned. "That has nothing to do with it." "I was just kidding. Really, thank you, Joey. It feels good to have someone appreciate my art." "It will be more than just someone if I have my way about it." "What do you mean?" "Breeze, you really don't know how good this is? Sweetheart, you need an agent. If you'll let me, I'd like to look into it for you." She shrugged. I think you'll find a great lack of interest." "You want to bet?" She rolled her eyes. He smiled. "We'll just see." He glanced at his watch. "But I have to leave." "I understand. We'll talk soon." He gently kissed her and left the room. Bree watched him trot down the stairs and out the front door, realizing she suddenly felt lonely. Outside, Joey took a moment to breathe in the crisp and somewhat cooler late September air, to appreciate the smell of flowers and grass and sunshine. He felt relaxed and in tune with the world. It made him smile. He'd come to see Breeze before he'd completed his usual morning routine, so he intended to head home and get in his workout. He answered his phone as he skipped down the large curved steps of the Sheridan's front landing. All his happy feelings lasted the split second it took him to glance at the phone before he pressed it to his ear. "Agent Davis." "Jeff, everything okay?" "Why wouldn't it be?" Jeff asked. "I'm figuring you called to report in after your watch at the Landau house last night, and if everything was status quo, you would simply document the night and brief Agent Carter as he arrived." "How very astute of you, Joey boy. Guess that's why I call you boss." "You have never called me boss, and I doubt you ever will, even when that day comes," Joey stated, wondering if there was any hidden resentment there. Joey was slated to take over Meritech because he was like family to Jason Lee. Jeff, 7 years Joey's senior, had been an agent much longer than Joey, and Jeff was one of Jason's right-hand men, along with Keegan Tanner, who ran the Southeast Division of Ameritech, and Alphonse Guzman, who ran the international side. Joey had immense respect for all 3 men. "So, what's up? Has something happened?" Joey asked as he slid into the car and started the engine. "No, but something could. I just wanted you to be aware. Ms. Landau gave Logan permission to go biking this Saturday with Ricky and Bree and the boys without consulting her husband. The boy was concerned about it, but she told him she had an idea on how to handle Landau if he disapproves of the outing." "What's the idea?" "Well, she never said, but I don't buy it." "You think she was lying to ease Logan's concerns?" "That's how I see it," Jeff said. "How you see it is always good for me." "Well, I appreciate the vote of confidence. So when Landau finds out his son is out with the evil Kino family, He may pop his cork, Joey surmised as he pulled out of the Sheridan Drive, mentally pushing the oasis out of his mind and focusing in on his day. You filled Carter in on this? Yeah. I'm a little worried. It's been several days since he's laid hands on her. Your initial report is the violence happens several times a week. Joey nodded. So it's past time. The pressure is building. He needs an excuse to let go. Hey, if all he needs is a little violence for a release, I wouldn't mind picking a fight with him at a bar or something. Well, not that I don't appreciate the heartfelt offer, but first, he'd have you arrested. Second, this guy doesn't frequent bars. He's more the country club type. And third, I can't have you accidentally killing the guy because I want really bad to see him stand trial for aggravated assault. Accidentally killing him? I think you have me confused with Keegan. Joey chuckled. Keegan would tell you that he doesn't accidentally kill anybody. When he kills, he does it on purpose. Jeff laughed. Yeah, that's exactly what Keegan would say. Well, thanks for the heads up, Jeff. And I didn't say it before, but thanks for taking the night shift. I know it's hard on a marriage. Yeah, Mick's not in love with the idea of me being gone at night, but she understands my job. Besides, she's got 2 heathen boys to keep her occupied. Joey thought about Jeff's pride and joy. The 3- and 4-year-old boys were definitely a handful. Thanks again, Jeff, and get some sleep. Will do. The moment Joey ended the call, his phone rang again. Good morning, Jason. Morning. I have a lot going on this morning, Joey, so I'm going to keep this short and sweet. First, I've been over yesterday's reports, and I want that gun out of the house. I'm assuming you've already had a word with Miss Sheridan about that? Yes, sir. Second, Agent Davis has filled you in about his concerns? Yes, sir. Good. Third and last, you read Agent Caulfield's report last night? No, sir, Joey admitted. I went straight to see Breeze about the gun and about her deliberately baiting Gordon. The rest of the time was spent, Jason blew out of breath. I get it. Read the report. Nutshell. After our client, Jason said with emphasis, left the Landau house yesterday and you tailed Ms. Landau, Caulfield was able to document the arrival of one Miss Catherine Knotts, a very rich, young, socially prominent woman who was a member of Gordon's country club. Lucky for us, Gordon performed with her on the leather chase in the front room before he took her upstairs to the bedroom, so we have video. And since Ms. Landau knew about the cameras in her home before she left and did not insist on their removal, we can count that as permission from the homeowner. And therefore, we have proof of adultery with video that could possibly be admitted in court as evidence, Joey said. Depending on the judge. Justin says if we get Mayfield, we're definitely in business. He doesn't think the man can be bought. If we get Curtis, we're in trouble, but may get by if there's enough publicity. Curtis may be in bed with Landau, but will not want to go down with a sinking ship. So we need to speak with Bella and let her know we have the evidence we need to remove her and Logan from the home with no chance of Gordon being able to take Logan away from her. Well, that part is not necessarily true. We have some evidence of his abuse and some of his infidelity. She could win a divorce settlement, not necessarily a child custody hearing. We'll stay on it a few more days, I think, maybe a week. I don't want him to slip through the greasy cracks. I want more documentation of the affair so he can't say it was a one-nighter, and more documentation of his tendency toward violence now that Ms. Landau knows the cameras are in place so that it will be admissible. That's it for now. You said there's a lot going on this morning. Anything I can help with? Well, only if you can be in 2 places at once. Agent Hawk was working security for Tessa Nichols after she had a couple of threatening letters from some guy who said he was going to blow her away at her next concert. She was playing the country crowd at Cheyenne's Big Fall Fair, and the guy tried for her last night, and Nate was hit. Damn it. He'll live, but it was a close call, and Jack took out the shooter. I'll give Nate a call, and his wife, too. Good. I'm going to fly up to meet with him, make sure the family's taken care of. On the East Coast, it seems Keegan is taking on the world again. He turned down working security for a Miami banker because Keegan believed him to be dirty. The guy took it personally and sent some men to harass him and his family. Joey's face darkened. You don't mess with an agent's family. I don't imagine Keegan and Lizzie took it too well, someone threatening their family and their kids. Not too well. Neither did John and Jody Apple, nor Chaz and Lisa Stewart. Keegan took it upon himself to investigate the banker's dealings. He found buku, enough to turn over to our friends at the Bureau. Last night, a giant bust went down. Big shootout. 10 of our agents were involved. Oh, sorry I missed that. I'm sorry, too. Would have been a good learning experience for you to be involved in a bust that size. Nevertheless, I need you where you are, and I'll make it up to you. I'll count on that. Anyone hurt in Miami? 2 feds, none of ours. The banker, 2 big-time drug lords, and scores of minions arrested. However, 4 perps ended up dead at the wrong end of Ameritech guns. Any of those Keegans? Good guess. Joey chuckled. Maybe I should have asked if any of those were not Keegans. Yes, but my time to chat is over. Read reports, you'll have the details. Better get Miss Sheridan out of your system or put her on hold, because if I have to fly east, you'll be called on to man my desk. Be ready. Absolutely, Joey said. He ended the call as he pulled into the parking garage of his apartment. Wasting no time, he ran inside, changed clothes, turned on the computer and the giant high-def screen on the wall, jumped on the treadmill, and began briefing himself on the details of Keegan's latest bust. New scene. Mark listened as Judge Mayfield addressed the court. He was a no-nonsense kind of guy. The glitz and glamour of Hollywood and big money didn't impress him. He frowned upon clicks. He expected both the district attorney's office and the defense attorneys to do their job correctly. Mark believed he made sound and logical rulings, even though some of those rulings had been made against Mark. All in all, he seemed to be a good man, and Mark hoped putting his cases before Judge Mayfield today wouldn't change his opinion of him. The judge stopped speaking abruptly as the doors to the court squeaked open. The judge frowned. Mark turned to see Gordon Landau enter the courtroom with an arrogant smile on his face. The man nodded his head at the judge and then at a few others in the room as he made his way up the aisle. Mark could only shake his head as Gordon actually stopped to clasp hands with a few attorney friends who were seated with their clients in the benches. Gordon smiled and whispered to them and finally arrived at the front pew where several men shifted over to allow him to sit. As I was saying, Judge Mayfield continued, I will not put up with any showboating nor any shenanigans. And for the benefit of those whose cases will be brought forward today, this is a preliminary hearing only, unless you intend to plead guilty. If that is the case, we will take care of it when your case is called. The judge glanced in Gordon's direction. For those of you who may not be used to county court or to my court, I do not tolerate being late. Keep that in mind for the future. Mark eyed Gordon. He was pleased to see the judge's remarks wipe the arrogant smile off his face. The court clerk began to call cases. As each one was called, the attorneys representing each defendant moved forward to the podium and then would be joined by one of the assistant DAs. While the judge accepted guilty pleas and reset court dates for trial, Mark glanced again over his notes, making sure he hadn't overlooked anything. County versus Miranda Bailey, the clerk finally announced. Mark glanced at his client, noting the worried yet hopeful expression in her large brown eyes. Every time he'd seen her, she'd been a wreck. Today, she'd smoothed her hair back into a small bun at the nape of her neck, donned a modest skirt and jacket whose deep golden color complemented her coffee-colored skin. She wore some makeup today, and Mark thought she looked quite beautiful and young and frightened. He gave her a reassuring smile, then made his way to the podium as the judge thumbed through the case on the desk in front of him. Judge Mayfield finally looked up. The charges are felony assault, cruelty to children, and child endangerment. Yes, sir, Mark answered. The judge nodded. Is the DA ready to go to trial with this case? Yes, sir, we believe we are, the assistant answered, her voice firm and somewhat haughty, as if she herself were somehow offended by the case. You believe, Ms. Brown? Are you or aren't you? Yes, sir, we are. The judge glanced at Mark. Are you ready, Mr. Adams? Mark supplied. No, Your Honor, we are awaiting the expert reports from 2 specialists in the field. The field of? SBS, sir, shaken baby syndrome. The murmur from the courtroom distracted Mark for a second. He hated saying those words in public. Immediately, a picture is drawn of his client in a state of frenzied rage, shaking her 1-year-old little boy until he was senseless. The judge went on as if he hadn't noticed the sound. What are these specialist titles and credentials? Well, Dr. Kadowski is a world-renowned neurosurgeon who specializes in children's injuries to the brain. Dr. Hines is chief of surgery at St. Love's Children's Hospital in Boston. His report will second Dr. Kadowski's findings. How long before these reports are ready? Well, I spoke with Dr. Kadowski this morning. He promises the report in 2 weeks. Dr. Hines emailed me Friday stating his report will arrive by the end of this week. The judge nodded. Excuse me, Your Honor, the assistant interrupted. This case has been on the books for almost 6 months now. We believe they've had long enough to have gathered the reports that they say they have coming. The judge frowned. You are suggesting that they are purposely delaying this case coming to trial? And they would like to do this because why? Well, of course, to prolong the perpetrator's freedom. The alleged perpetrator. The defendant, Ms. Brown. The defendant, she repeated. Judge Mayfield turned to Mark. Is this true? Mark swallowed and drew a calming breath. Ms. Bailey, the defendant, Mark said pointedly, would like nothing better than to have this all over with. Each delay is another month she doesn't get to see her child. With good reason, Ms. Brown mumbled, just loud enough for all to hear. The court murmured their agreement. Judge Mayfield looked up quickly. Another outburst, even the slightest, and I'll have you for contempt of court. He raised his brows at Mark. Anything else, Mr. Adams? Judging merely from the reaction of this courtroom, it's obvious that most people are all too willing to immediately believe the worst in a case involving an innocent child. I believe Ms. Bailey is innocent until proven guilty. There is no other evidence, no witnesses to the alleged incident. There is no sign of abuse, no bruises. A full body scan was performed and showed nothing. Had Ms. Bailey shaken her child hard enough to cause seizures, there would have been bruises, thumbprints, or fingerprints where she held the child. There is nothing. There is only the doctor, who is not even a specialist, who believes the child was probably shaken and that shaking the child probably caused the hematomas which caused the seizures. I hate to think that we will send someone to prison based on probably. On the other side, there are specialists who believe the hematomas and seizures were caused by something else. Since this will be a trial of the experts, I think it only fitting that we wait to have the reports from the experts. I apologize for their delay. Both doctors have extremely busy schedules and were gracious enough to take a look at the child's medical records. That took up the first 6 weeks. After looking over the medical records and realizing a grave mistake was about to be made, Dr. Hines was able to rearrange his schedule and fly in to examine Ms. Bailey's little boy, run tests, and come to his conclusions. That took the next 4 weeks. I had to wait for a little longer for Dr. Kadowski, who was out of the country, speaking to the European Council of Doctors on the most recent breakthroughs in brain trauma. I stayed in constant touch with him, and he was able to make it here to see the child last week. You couldn't have gotten the opinion of a doctor more accessible? Yes, sir, I could have. But there were 2 things making me wait on Dr. Kadowski. And those 2 things were, I believe Ms. Bailey to be innocent and thought her life to be important enough to warrant the best. And he paused, hoping he wasn't making a mistake. And this being one of my first big cases, I wanted to make sure I win. He stood straight-faced while the rest of the courtroom chuckled. The judge did his best to suppress his smile. Finally, he nodded. I thank you for your honesty, Mr. Adams. I'll reschedule the court date for Monday, November 1st. Thank you, Your Honor. Well done, Judge Mayfield said. He looked at the clerk. Call the next case. Back in his seat, Justin shook Mark's hand. Well done indeed, Justin whispered. Thanks. I feel like I need to go throw up now. Justin smiled. As the next case was being heard, Mark leaned over to whisper in Miranda's ear. Okay, we're set for November 1st. Thank you, Mr. Adams, she said as a tear escaped. He patted her hand. It's not over yet. I understand, though I have a feeling it will all work out. You keep that thought, he said. He looked past her, smiled, and nodded at the girl's grandmother. The woman nodded back. Mark watched as the 2 women quietly slipped from the courtroom. His attention was drawn by Gordon Landau's voice. That one's mine. He made a show of gathering his papers, walking to the podium, opening his leather-bound legal pad. The charge is child pornography, the judge stated. Yes, it is, Gordon answered, though it will be proven to be ridiculous. A murmur from the crowd, and the judge looked up quickly, frowned, and the court became quiet. That will remain to be seen at the time of trial. Ms. Brown, is the DA's office ready to go to trial on this? Yes, sir, we are. Mr. Landau, the judge asked. Pleased that the judge knew his name, though they'd never been introduced, Gordon smiled broadly. Actually, Your Honor, I'm going to need to reset the court date. And why is that? Gordon flipped quickly through his pages. One moment, he said, turning several more pages, scanning each one briefly. Ah, yes. That would be because Mr. Kinder is not available for trial. Well, I assure you we're terribly sorry to inconvenience Mr. Kinder, but unless he has a very good excuse to... He does, Gordon said quickly, interrupting the judge. Judge Mayfield's face darkened. Mr. Landau, let me warn you now that I don't like to be interrupted. Oh, yes, of course, Your Honor. I meant no offense, Gordon mumbled. What is Mr. Kinder's problem? My client has suffered a stroke and is incapable of standing trial. He's recovering in a facility in Bakersfield. At this time, he is unable to walk or speak. The judge took a few moments to make notes, nodded, and looked up. Ms. Brown, what are the particulars of this case? The assistant flipped through her papers. Your Honor, Mr. Kinder was arrested when he attempted to contact a child pornography website that was under surveillance by a county task force. While the woman continued giving details, Gordon quickly shuffled through his own papers. He remembered the case, just barely. He'd assigned it to one of his underlings who, 2 days ago, had the audacity to tell Gordon he was leaving the firm, hence Gordon's appearance at county court today. Gordon had done his best to make sure the attorney had not taken any clients with him. He smiled as he remembered the man's words. What are you going to do, Gordon? Work them yourself? I have 9 cases pending right now. You going to work them all? With ease, Gordon had answered smugly. And then he'd had security escort the gentleman out of the building. Mr. Landau, Mr. Kinder still pleads not guilty? Gordon brought himself back to the present and held up a finger. One moment, Your Honor. He took a few seconds to read over the case. Yes, sir, Mr. Kinder's plea remains. Fill me in on his defense, please. One more moment, Gordon said, again holding up his finger. This time he took at least a full minute to read over the case. Mark could only shake his head. This was the great Gordon Landau in action. Granted, he was used to being shown deference in state court, but was he so full of himself that he couldn't understand the protocol most judges insist upon in their courtrooms? Finally, Gordon looked up, ready to proceed. Your Honor, after 30 years of marriage, Mr. Kinder and his wife divorced about a year ago. 6 months of trying to deal with his emotional pain and loneliness, Mr. Kinder sought solace in visiting some of the porn sites, adult porn sites, that is. Not that you or I approve of such behavior. We can certainly understand that the man was simply attempting to fill a void in his life, and I don't need to remind you that adult porn is perfectly legal. No, you don't need to remind me, the judge said, a warning in his tone. Gordon looked up and realized his mistake and went on. He admits to being curious, as he's never watched porn before this time. You may be aware that once one visits, and especially once one subscribes to a porn site, one is inundated with advertising and spam offering looks at more sites. Mr. Kinder merely clicked on one of those sites, and when he saw children involved, he immediately wrote an email to the webmaster for the site and instructed them to never contact him again. He then sent an email to his local police department informing them of the site and how he came across the site. And did the local police contact him or investigate the complaint? I'm not sure. As far as I know, they never had a chance before the CBI moved in. You can imagine the surprise when Mr. Kinder opened his door to admit the CBI, and they promptly placed him under arrest. Of course, he immediately contacted my firm. Do you have copies of the emails Mr. Kinder sent to the porn site and to the police department? He thumbed through some papers. It doesn't appear I have them with me today, but I'm sure I can get them. Do you have the medical paperwork required to continue this case that shows Mr. Kinder is indeed a stroke patient? The paperwork is forthcoming. Forthcoming, Judge Mayfield said slowly. Yes, apparently the paperwork has been requested by my office but has not been returned. How long ago was it requested? I'm not sure. The judge let out a heavy sigh. Mr. Landau, it's obvious to me and to those in this courtroom that you are ill-prepared to handle this case today. I am handling the case for another attorney in my office who is otherwise engaged. For whatever reason, Mr. Landau, I'm sure your client has paid you dearly for your services. I'm sure he doesn't care what the reason is. His life is very much in your hands. Do you realize that, Mr. Landau? Do you realize that Mr. Kinder faces jail time depending on how you handle his case? From what you tell me today, this case could be over and done with had you been prepared to document your statements today. I could have thrown this case out today and had you been properly prepared. I have no idea why your request for the medical paperwork has not been returned. I think it is of major importance, don't you? I suggest that you take this weekend to drive to the facility in Bakersfield personally and retrieve the necessary paperwork. I want that paperwork on my desk first thing Monday morning. But I had plans to. I will not have attorneys in my court playing havoc with the lives of the people they're supposed to represent. So I suggest you change whatever plans you had for the weekend and take care of this client. First thing Monday morning, Mr. Landau, is that clear? Mark tried not to gloat as he watched Gordon's face turn red with either anger or embarrassment. Clear enough, Gordon muttered. Thank you. The judge nodded at the clerk. Call the next case, please. Mark watched as Gordon moved back to his seat. The man turned as he sat to glare at Mark. Mark kept his expression completely blank. Even though he felt somewhat victorious, he had no wish to raise Gordon's ire, because he knew who would receive the brunt of that. While the judge took care of a guilty plea and 2 more continuances, Mark moved to sit next to the other client he would represent today. An 18-year-old boy, Jamie Youngman, accused of rape, was a college freshman with both an academic scholarship and football scholarship to USC that would all go down the drain if Mark wasn't able to help him. Mark shook his hand and nodded to the young man's mother and father who accompanied him. Keep your fingers crossed on this today. Jamie nodded, the hope in his eyes mirrored by his parents. When the case was called, Mark drew a calming breath, said a quick prayer, stood, and went to the podium. Judge Mayfield finished reading his notes and looked up. The charge is rape, along with a lesser charge of unlawful sexual intercourse due to the victim being a child. He looked toward the DA. Mr. Hodges, are you ready to proceed with this case? We are, Your Honor. Mr. Adams, Judge Mayfield asked. We, too, are ready to proceed if needs be, Your Honor, but I would like to suggest that the case be thrown out before we waste the court's time. I assume you have new information? Yes, sir. I've recently been contacted by both the mother and the sister of the young lady who accused my client of rape. The one you call a child is 17 years of age. She and Mr. Youngman have been boyfriend and girlfriend for 4 months. I know the facts of the case, Mr. Adams. Please move along. Mark cleared his throat. Yes, sir. The mother and sister of the alleged victim have stepped forward with testimony that the victim was angry with Mr. Youngman for not proposing marriage to her before he left for college. She was angry that she was still in high school and he'd moved on. They will testify that she contrived the entire thing to get back at Mr. Youngman. Judge Mayfield nodded. And do you have any written statements to this effect? Yes, sir, Mark stated firmly as he held up the documents. I have 2 affidavits, one from each of them. Bring them to me. Mark approached and handed the papers to the judge and went back to his place. He kept his eyes forward as the judge read. The judge looked up. This is all well and good, but not good enough on its own. Who knows what agenda the mother and sister of this girl may have? We must take every claim of rape seriously. We must empower women with a voice, or we'll set them back 50 years. Mark nodded. Understood, Your Honor. Will the victim's own written words be enough? Her own words? Yes, sir. Along with the affidavit, the mother found her daughter's diary, which specifically spells out her entire plan to ruin this young man. Do you have that diary? I do, Your Honor, Mark said solemnly. He reached into his briefcase and pulled the small book out for all to see. Your Honor, the DA said loudly, our office has been given no notice of this new evidence. Mark held up a small green card. Actually, Your Honor, I have a signed return receipt showing the DA's office received this information 2 weeks ago. I have also placed numerous calls to Mr. Hodges and have yet to have my calls returned. Judge Mayfield nodded and motioned for Mark to bring him the diary. I've used highlighter to place brackets around more important statements, Mark explained. The loose pages there are schoolwork done by the alleged victim, with her name on it to verify that the handwriting is the same. If needed, I have a handwriting expert ready to testify that the writing is indeed that of the alleged victim. Mark waited while the judge thumbed through the diary and examined the other evidence. He knew it could go either way. Finally, Judge Mayfield looked up. I don't know why your office is having trouble communicating, Mr. Hodges. Would you like to examine the affidavits and the diary? As far as I'm concerned, everything is in order. No, sir, that won't be necessary. In light of the new evidence, we withdraw the case against Mr. Youngman. Case dismissed, Judge Mayfield said firmly. There were a few gasps in the courtroom that Mark knew came from Jamie and his parents. He couldn't hold back his smile. He gathered his papers, shoved them in his briefcase, and turned to head back to his seat. Mr. Adams. Mark turned back to the judge, his heart pounding. Yes, sir? The judge actually smiled. Again. Well done. Thank you, sir. The judge gestured toward Gordon Landau. All of you who have forgotten the importance of your job, I offer Mr. Adams as a shining example of what you should strive to be. Efficient, professional, prepared, and passionate. Fine qualities indeed. Thank you, Your Honor, Mark said again as he left the podium. He didn't stop to sit. He motioned for the Youngman family to follow him out of court. The moment they stepped through the heavy double doors, both Jamie and his mother threw their arms around Mark. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mrs. Youngman said as she sobbed. My pleasure, Mark said, but really it wasn't me. I mean, if Mrs. Anders and her younger daughter hadn't come to me, we probably would have had to go to trial. But we didn't, and you did a fine job, Mr. Youngman offered. We will be forever grateful. Mark smiled and held out his hand to Jamie. Take care, Jamie. Work hard in school. I will. I hope you'll come see some of my games. I'd be honored. Mark watched the much-relieved family head toward the courthouse doors. He looked upward, smiled, nodded, and whispered, Thank you, Jesus. Then quickly, he pulled out his cell and called his brother. What's up, Joey asked, his good mood still evident. I just finished up a court session with Gordon Landau, and I want you to be aware of 2 things. First, he bombed out in court and was reprimanded by the judge, who then held me up as an example to him. Joey frowned. So he'll be in a piss-poor mood when he gets home tonight, which means I need to be on my toes. Correct. Second, he's been ordered by the judge to drive to Bakersfield this weekend to get some paperwork from a medical facility, so the agent you have tailing him needs to be prepared to go on a trip. Gotcha. Anything else? Not for now. So, congratulations. For what? For doing such a fine job that you would be held up as an example. It must have been some kind of great job you did. I covered all my bases. Too bad that doing what's expected of you is considered an outstanding job. Whatever, bro. I know you go above and beyond. Just accept the congrats gracefully. Mark chuckled. Okay, thanks, little brother. Take care of Bella and Logan. Will do. New scene. But why Bakersfield, of all places? Catherine Knotts whined into the phone. Gordon thought of the blonde beauty and how she was probably sprawled across a chase lounge by the pool at the country club. She was young and clever, and every man at the club wanted her desperately, yet he was the one who had her. She was his, and she made everything in his boring life bearable, especially living with the sniveling little piece of nothing that was his wife. Because I have to pick up some paperwork there. I have to cover for the pile of crap that Les left behind. Well, what could we possibly do in Bakersfield? Well, we'll stay at the Crystal Palace, and the Moscow Ballet is performing at the Fox, and I've arranged for a full treatment at the spa. Oh, Gordy, you do know how to treat a girl, don't you? Oh, I truly do, Catherine. Too bad for your wife that she doesn't appreciate what a good man she has. Too bad indeed, but I'm lucky to have you. Yes, you are, and don't you forget it. So what time shall I be ready? Friday noon. I can't wait to get you alone. Me neither, my darling. New scene. Bella tasted the sauce and nodded her head and placed the wooden spoon neatly in the spoon rest designed to keep the countertop clean. She went to the oven and opened the door and peeked in at the pie, making sure the crust was not getting overly browned. She had been racking her brain all day, trying to come up with something Gordon would accept as the reason for allowing Logan to spend the day biking with the Kenos on Saturday. Nothing had come to mind. She'd admitted to herself she was afraid of his reaction, afraid enough that she almost wished she hadn't given Logan permission. No. Her son deserved to be able to go out with friends and do normal things and to have some fun. She was so happy that Logan was finally making a few friends. He always seemed like such a loner, and the only time he ever seemed to act like a normal kid was at their martial arts class, especially on Saturdays when Master Mark was teaching. Master Mark. Bella sighed as she thought of him. He was so kind to her and Logan. He was concerned for them. He was concerned for her. I care for you, Bella, he'd said, and he'd kissed her, and she was so bad because she wanted him to do it again and again. Her eyes closed and her lips parted as she imagined him moving close to her, placing his hands on her, drawing her close and placing his lips on hers. Sighing, she touched her lips with her finger. What are you doing? Gasping, she jumped back and hit the pot of spaghetti sauce, sloshing the sauce over the counter and onto the floor. I was just thinking. I didn't hear you come in. You were standing in the middle of the kitchen with your eyes closed. Sometimes it helps me to think clearly, like it blocks out all the other distractions. Gordon shook his head. You are pathetic, Bella. Now look at the mess you've made. She reached for a towel. I'll get it cleaned. He rolled his eyes at her. Yes, you will. And you'll clean the rest of this filthy house while you're at it. I'm going away for the weekend. I have some business I have to take care of for one of my clients. I'm leaving tomorrow when I leave for work, so pack me a bag to take with me in the morning, and I don't want to have to come back to this house. She nodded, her eyes wide. She was careful not to show any pleasure in what he was saying. However, inside she was jumping with joy. She couldn't believe her luck. He's going away. He will never know that Logan is gone. She sobered enough to speak. When will you be returning? You keeping tabs on me, Bella? No, of course not. I just wanted to know how many changes of clothing you might need me to pack for you. I'll be gone Friday and Saturday, and I'll be back on Sunday afternoon and pack my swimsuit and my tux, and do your best, Bella, to keep it from getting creased. Bella nodded. Now, while I'm gone, I want you to clean this house. Look at this floor. You know how I feel about dirty floors. Bella looked around her, trying hard to see where it was dirty. When I get back, I'm going to pull out the stove and refrigerator, Bella, and I'd better not find one speck of dirt, one greasy spot, one crumb. He reached up to open a cabinet just above her head, and she flinched. He glowered. And I want you to clean and organize every single cabinet and the pantry, too. And while you're at it, the entire back half of the garage is a pig pen, and I want all those boxes labeled and organized and the floor thoroughly scrubbed. He reached forward and grabbed a lock of her hair that had fallen from the ponytail, enjoying the frightened look that came into her eyes. That should keep you busy enough so that you won't miss me while I'm gone. Huh, Bella? She nodded quickly. He looked deep into her eyes and decided he wanted nothing from her tonight. Where's my son? He's upstairs doing his homework. Good. Now hurry and finish dinner. I'm starved. New scene. Hi, Joey. Breeze purred into the phone. The moment she'd seen it was him, she'd put down the paintbrush and slipped down into the armchair, the only piece of furniture in the upstairs room she'd turned into an art studio. Hello, gorgeous. I'm guessing from the tone of your voice that everything is okay with Bella at the moment. Okay in that he's not beating her at the moment, yes. Also okay in that he won't be around her for 3 days because he's going out of town on a business trip. Well, now that is good news. More good news is he nailed one Catherine Knotts in the living room, clearly on camera, for all the world to see, and is taking the same woman with him on his trip. So more footage will be forthcoming. Catherine, I should have known. I must say they've played it pretty cool at the country club. Still, this is great, isn't it? Yes, it's great. It should all be over soon. Thank God. Absolutely, I do. Every single day, he said softly. So, Breeze, have you spoken to Bella today? He asked, even though he already knew the answer. No. Why? Because you're supposed to be retrieving the gun you gave her. Oh, that. Okay, I'll try to get it first thing in the morning after Gordo leaves for work. Good. And now that we have all the business out of the way, tell me what you're wearing. Breeze giggled. I have on a black teddy. Joey grunted. He'd been playing around, but it was a bad idea. And I'm wearing black fishnet stockings and 3-inch spiky heels. Good grief, Breeze. You do paint quite a picture. She laughed. So you tell me. I'm trying to force a picture out of my mind so that I don't leave my post and come over there. Oh, I don't want you to leave Bella alone, so I'll tell you the truth. I'm wearing a pair of gray cut-off sweats that are spattered with paint and one of my father's old shirts, button-down collar, short sleeve, light blue, also spattered with paint. Joey blew out a breath. I thought it would help. I still want to come over. But for Bella's sake, I'll try to practice some self-control. Thank you, Agent Adams. You're welcome. Now, next order of business, Gordon's going to be away, and I want to play. Will you go out with me tomorrow night and Saturday night too? She sighed. I did promise, didn't I? Bayside Grill, right? Bayside Grill on Saturday. Tomorrow night, how about the Mishamaro? Oh, well, that's pretty exclusive. Do you like Japanese? I love it, and I love sushi, and they have the best. I'll pick you up at 7 and bring a bag. A bag? Why? Because I intend to talk you into staying with me at my loft, and we'll have breakfast Saturday morning. No hanky-panky, I promise. I just want to get to know you, and I don't know when we'll get another opportunity. We could visit my mom and Eric and take an hour or so to walk on the beach and swim in the ocean. Meet the parents, huh? They don't bite. When she didn't answer, he became concerned. Breeze? Okay, we'll make it a weekend. Good. Also, before we hit the Bayside Grill, I thought Saturday afternoon you might go with me to visit your sister. Visit Bella? Sure. Why? Landau left her with a list of chores so long she'll never get done. I thought we'd go over there and knock them out for her. Wow. Wow? Joey, I don't know what to say. I never thought it possible that a man could be so unselfish and thoughtful. Joey sighed. Well, who do you base your judgments of men on, Breeze? Your brother-in-law? Surely you realize he's not the norm. I hope he's not, yet since I've seen what a brute he is, I tend to recognize the same traits in most men to some degree or another. The same traits? Like we're bigger and stronger? The same traits like you think you have the right to push us around and tell us what to do. Have I pushed you around? Not yet. Another sigh. Have I told you what to do? Yeah. When? When you told me not to have any dealings with Gordo. That was... And you ordered me to take that gun back from Bella. Okay. Those orders came from Agent Joseph Adams of Ameritech Security, who is assigned to guard the welfare of your sister. Can you separate the two of us? She pouted. Okay, maybe you're right. Maybe I can't judge all men by Gordon. How about your father? He was a good man, right? Yes, a wonderful man. Well, maybe use him as your base. Good idea. So are we straight on the plans? Yes, but Saturday night we stay at my house. No hanky-panky, as you put it. Deal. That is the end of chapter 6.